Chapter 3 The Ice Phantoms. He dreamed that he sailed a massive ship over an infinity of ice. The ship was raised on runners and had 50 sails. Whales inhabited the ice, and other strange creatures too. Then he no longer sailed the ship, but rode in a chariot drawn by bears beneath a strange, dull sky. But the ice remained, worlds bereft of heat, old dead worlds in the final stages of entropy. But everywhere was ice, harsh, gleaming ice, ice that brought death to any who dared it. Ice which was the ultimate symbol of death, the death of the very universe itself. Coram groaned in his sleep. "It is the one I heard of." The voice was soft yet intrusive. "Law Errant," came another's voice. "Aye, who else could it be? There is the silver hand, and that is the she-face, I'd swear, though I'd never seen one." Coram opened his single eye and glared at the speaker. "I am dead," said Coram, "and would be grateful if you would allow me to be dead in peace." "You live," said the youth, practically. He was a boy of about 16. Though his face and body were thin, starved, his eyes were bright and intelligent, and, like most of the Mabden Coram had found here, he was well formed. He had a great mop of blonde hair, kept back from his eyes by a simple leather band. He had a fur cape over his shoulders, and the familiar gold and silver collar and bangles on arms and ankles. "I am Bran. This is my brother, Tiranon. You are Krem, the god." God? Coram began to realise that the people he had seen ahead of him had been Mabden, not Foymure. He smiled at the youth. Do gods fall so easily from exhaustion? Bran shrugged and ran his fingers through his hair. "I know nothing of the customs of gods." "Could you not have been in disguise, pretending to be immortal in order to test us?" "Well, that is a fine way of looking at a rather more ordinary fact," said Coram. He turned to look at Tiranon, and then looked in surprise at Bran again. The two were virtually identical in features, though Bran's fur cloak was from a brown bear, and Tiranon's was from a tawny wolf. Coram looked up and realised that he saw the folds of a small tent in which he lay while Bran and Tiranon crouched beside him. "Who are you?" Coram asked. "Where are you from? Do you know aught of the fate of Caer Marlod?" "We are the Tuana'ana, or what is left of that folk," the youth replied. "We are from a land to the east of Gwythnu Garanhir, which in turn lies due south of Crem Cruach, your land. When the Foymure began to come, some of us fought them and thus perished. The rest of us, youths and old people for the most part, set off for Caer Marlod, where we heard warriors resisted the Foymure. We lost our way, and had to hide many times from the Foymure and their dogs, but now we are only a short distance from Caer Marlod, which lies west of here." "Well, Caer Marlod is my destination too," said Coram, sitting up. "I carry the spear Bryanak with me, and would tame the bull of Crinanas." "That bull cannot be tamed," said Tiranon softly. "We saw it less than 2 weeks since. We were hungry and hunted it for its meat, but it turned on our hunters and slew 5 of them with its sharp horns before it went away toward the west." "Well, if the bull cannot be tamed," said Coram, accepting the mug of thin soup which Bran handed him and sipping it gratefully, "then Caer Marlod is lost, and you would be wiser to seek some other sanctuary." "We are looking for High Brere's ale," Bran told him seriously. The enchanted isle beyond the sea. We thought we might be happy there and safe from the Foimure. Safe from the Foimure you would be, Coram said, but not from your own fears. Do not seek High Breazail, Bran of the Tuanaana, for it means awful death to Mabden folk. No. We shall all go together to Caer Marlod, if the Foimure do not find us first, and I will see if I can speak to the Bull of Crinanas and make him see our point of view. Bran shook his head sceptically. Tiernan, his twin, echoed the gesture. We move on again in a few minutes, Tiernan told Coram. Will you be fit to ride again then? Is my horse alive? Alive and rested. We found a little grass for him. Well, then I am fit to ride, said Coram. There were less than 30 people in the band which moved slowly across the snow, and of those 30, more than a score were old men and women. There were 3 other boys like Bran and his brother Tiernan, and there were 3 girls, one of whom was less than 10 years old. The younger children, it was learned, had perished in a sudden raid which the hounds of Kerrenos had made on the camp when the remnants of the tribe had first begun its trek to Caer Marlod. Snow rhymed the hair of all and made it sparkle. Coram joked that they were all kings and queens and wearing diamond crowns. They had been weaponless before he came, and now he distributed his gear among them. A sword to one, a dirk to another, a lance each to 2 more, and his bow and arrows to Bran. He kept only the spear, Brianek, as he rode at the head of the column or walked beside his horse, which would take 2 or 3 old people at a time, for few had eaten much in recent months, and they were all light enough. Bran had estimated that they were still 2 days from Caer Marlod, but the going began to get easier the further west they travelled. Coram's spirits had begun to rise considerably, and his horse's energy was increasing, so that he was able to make short gallops ahead to spy out the land. Judging by the improvements in the weather, the Foimure had not yet reached the hill fortress. The little party entered a valley late on the afternoon of what they hoped would be their last full day of travelling. It was not a particularly deep valley, but it offered some shelter from the icy wind which occasionally blew across the moor, and they welcomed any shelter. Coram noticed that on the slopes of the hills on either side of them were gleaming formations of ice, which had perhaps been formed from waterfalls blown by a wind coming from the east. They were some distance into the valley and had decided to take up camp for the night, though the sun had not yet set, when Coram looked up from watching the youths erecting the tents and saw a movement. He had been sure that one of the ice shapes had changed its position. He put this down to his own tired vision and the failing light. And then more of the shapes were moving, and it was unmistakable. They converged on the camp. Coram shouted the alarm and began to run towards his horse. The shapes were like gleaming phantoms, darting down the slopes into the valley. Coram saw an old woman at the far end of the camp throw up her arms in horror and turn to escape, but a shimmering, ghostly figure seemed to absorb her and drag her back up the hill. Before hardly anyone was aware of it, 2 more old women were seized and dragged away. Now the camp was in a furor. Bran shot 2 accurate shafts at the ice phantoms, but the arrows merely passed through them. Coram hurled the spear Brianek at another, and took it where its head might be. But Brianek came sailing back to his hand without having harmed the phantom. However, it seemed that the things were timid, for once they had taken their prey, they faded back again into the hills. Coram heard Bran and Tiernan shout and began to run together up the steep slopes in pursuit of one of the phantoms. Coram called to them that the chase would be futile, and would put them in even greater danger, but they would not listen. Coram paused for a moment, and then followed. The darkness was creeping in snow. Shadows fell across the snow. The sky bore only a tinge of sunlight, a smear of blood and milk. At the best of times this was poor light for hunting, and the ice phantoms would be hard to see in the full brightness of noon. Coram managed to keep Bran and Tiernan in sight, but only just. Bran had paused to shoot a third arrow at what he thought to be an ice phantom. Tiernan pointed, and they ran off in another direction altogether, Coram still calling to them, though he feared to attract the attention of the strange creatures the two boys pursued. It grew darker still. "Bran!" shouted Coram. "Tiernan!" Then he found them, and they were kneeling in the snow, and they were weeping. Coram looked and saw that they knelt beside what was probably the body of one of the old women. "Is she dead?" he murmured. "Aye," said Bran. "Our mother is dead." Coram had not known that one of the women had been the youth's mother. He let out a deep, long sigh and turned away and looked into the shadowy, grinning faces of three of the phantoms. Coram cried out, raising Bryanek to stab at the things. Silently the phantoms moved upon him. He felt their tendrils touch his skin, and his flesh began to freeze. This was how they paralyzed their victims, and this was how they fed, drawing his heat into their own bodies. Perhaps this was how those people he had seen before had died, beside the lake. Coram despaired of saving his life, or those of the two boys. There was no means of fighting such intangible foes. And then the tip of the spear Bryanek began to glow a peculiar orange red. And when the tip touched one of the ice phantoms, the creatures hissed and disappeared, becoming no more than a cloud of steam in the air. And then the steam dispersed. Coram did not question the power of the spear. He swung it at the other two phantoms, touching them lightly with the glowing tip, and they too vanished. It was as if the ice phantoms needed heat to live, but too much heat overloaded them and they perished. "We must make fires," Coram told the boys. "Brands. That will keep them away. And we will not camp here, we will march by torchlight. It does not matter if the Foy Muir or any of their servants see us. It will be best to reach Caer Marlod as soon as possible, for we have no means of knowing what other creatures like those the Foy Muir command." Bran and Tiernan picked up their mother's corpse between them and began to follow Coram down the hillside. The tip of the spear Bryanek now faded again until it looked as it had always looked, merely a well-made spearhead. In the camp, Coram told the others of his decision, and all were agreed. And so they moved on, the ice phantoms lurking just beyond the light which the torches cast, making small gasping sounds, little wet sounds, pleading sounds, until they had passed through the valley and were on the other side. The phantoms did not follow them, but still they marched on, for the wind had turned for the moment, and it brought the salty smell of the sea, and they knew that they must surely be close to Caer Marlod and Sanctuary. But they knew too that the Foy Muir, and all whom the Foy Muir commanded, were nearby. And this gave even the oldest of the folk new energy and speed, and all prayed that they would be spared until the morning, when they must surely see Caer Marlod ahead.